in the raw. Okay, it's kind of free media. In the raw. And I'm your friend and your brother, Haji Dr. Ocean Khan, in the raw. I have two interesting articles here. One in Sunday, the January 15th, and one in January 12th by my favorite columnist. Who is my favorite columnist? Freddie Kissoon. Would you guys believe I comment so much on Freddie Kissoon, and I read so much of his articles, but we have never spoken. We have never ever spoken. We have never met. We do not know each other, other than from our public pronouncements and expose and exposures and so on. Aubrey I became more interested in him from about 2019 to 2020, when I saw a side of him of grand wisdom and much patriotism. Not that he was not a patriot. Freddie Kissoon was always a pet patriot. I put my neck on the block for that. And I will fight for him if anybody disagree with that. He has such a good heart. He is generally a kind person. And what I find also about Freddie is that he's very contented. He accepts the fact and the reality of the circumstances of his life and destiny, and the universal energies that comes down, and what is for him. You can see Freddie is not a guy who is despotic or desperate for wealth. He never goes out looking for it. As a matter of fact, he could have gone into business and opened up a school. Nice, quality private school. He could even have opened up a part-time institution on philosophy. But I find him also to be a great historian and articulator of ideas. So I applaud Freddie. And the article I have here in mind is Aubrey to FAAIZ et Brutus. For those who don't know, I might not have been getting the newspaper and usually don't follow, but likes to follow Facebook and appreciate me. My power in the raw became extreme due to the fact that I'm able to read and articulate so anyone could understand. I try to break down the big words and so on. And it became popular because many people do not have the newspapers, nor do they have time to read. But when they relax, they could listen. And then they like the personality and the charisma with which I put the information out. Aubrey to FAAIZ et Brutus. Now, he is referring to Aubrey Norton, who has been put in a scandalous position according to the media, and has been alleged by FAAIZ, their treasurer, that he was signing blank check. And he would be instructed through a third party by Aubrey, who is like the acting general secretary. See that the general secretary has resigned, to sign blank checks, at one time 20 checks, and then some at other times. And this has created a kind of a crisis within the political infrastructure of the People's National Congress, and has brought great shame locally and internationally into it. And so, while FAAIZ exposed Aubrey, and exposed him in many other ways, I just saw another conversation that was recorded and is now in the mass media, going around where three persons were having a conversation and some very nasty parts came out there against Aubrey Norton. And that is about his leadership, his style, and not having faith in his people. And even FAAIZ would call to speak to him, would tell him some humiliating and insultive words. Then I also found why they probably, obviously I found this, my understanding, why they put him there, is because they wanted an Indo-Guyanese within the realm to show that they have some Indo-Guyanese there, to attract Indo-Guyanese. But I found his English language, that even all of us, we have problems with our English language and sometimes with our grammar. But FAAIZ, English is extremely poor in the conversation that I have. But I'm not here to discuss that so much, but Aubrey to FAAIZ et tu, Brute. Now, et tu, Brute, what does it mean? In the drama of the life of Julius Caesar, the greatest Roman emperor that is said that ever lived, that created many amazing arts of war, techniques and so on, and also one who suffered from what is known as the fits. But that's a different thing altogether. I'm not here to discuss his fits. But most intellectuals and such people usually have some kind of medical issue. Now, et tu, Brute simply stands that when they were going to assassinate him, everyone in the Congress of the Republicans, you know the word, right? They all agreed that they had to get rid of him or he would have declared himself an emperor for life, and in which his word had to be taken as if it is the word of God, so to say. So they decided that he was a dangerous person for the Republic, and so they wanted to kill Julius Caesar. It is said that in the history books that Julius Caesar never used the word et tu, Brute, and you tu, Brutus. Now, who is Brutus? And this is where Aubrey Norton, Freddie is writing that word, even though Aubrey didn't use that word as far as I know, but we'll find out maybe in his expose here whether. But et tu, Brute? So Brutus was like a stepson to Julius Caesar, a little boy who he grew and took care of and loved and protected him and gave him enormous opportunities, and the doors would open just because they knew he was the stepson, or that he was having a relationship with the mother of Brutus. But then, when everyone pierced Julius Caesar, the final blow was done in the front face of Julius Caesar, because he was afraid. And he went there eventually, and at the end, he plugged the last pierce into the body, the last dagger into the body of Julius Caesar, and his name was Brutus. And so, et tu, Brute, shocked to know that you are like my stepson and I did so much for you. So that's why he said, et tu, Brute, and you too, Brutus? Et tu, Brute, you too, is my traitor, my betrayer? And so, Freddie has a way and his style with English language, his skill in articulating and writing and history. Anyhow, let's go on. Let me read directly. It's going on now. Now, that was my take. We are going now into the gist. I have not read the article. I don't like to read the article. Mr. Mursaleen resigned from the post of treasurer from the PNC and made two damning statements, it's a bit blurred there, the writing, about the PNCR leader and the PNC party itself, both of which has damaged the credibility and electoral prospects of the PNC. Credibility mean the credit, the trust that the PNC is supposed to have, that Marceline made some damning statements about the PNC leader, that's Aubrey Norton. And now I can see why he's saying et tu Brutus, and you too Brutus, because Marceline said about the PNC and the PNC party itself and the leader, both of which has damaged the credibility and the electoral prospects of the PNC for them to be able to win an election, or the prospects, electoral prospects. The first revelation is that he was signing blank checks. He is quoted in the press as saying, I do not know what are the monks of those checks. So it has, and I do not know for what reasons the money, if any, was spent on. If Mr. Marceline's statement is factual, then the PNC has committed a depraved act of financial skullduggery. Now, I was getting mixed up because he was saying FAAIZ and then he got to Marceline, but obviously it seems the name FAAIZ Marceline is the man's name. So it's the same person. And it shows that if he's saying Marceline is factual, then the PNC has committed a depraved act of financial skullduggery. So that if the CEC, the Central Executive Committee of the People's National Congress, should call in the police, some people will get arrested, including FAAIZ. Because no way in the world do you sign a blank check. I collect blank checks at times, but my people had to cross them. And at certain times in my company, if it cannot be crossed, I will not sign it until I'm at the place where it has to be paid. What Marceline did there is typical of an employee who do not seem to understand how to truly operate a business. And from what I gather, he's a businessman. So he should know how to handle these kinds of things. Let me move on. It's a depraved act of financial skullduggery, according to Freddie Kissoon. The treasury of an organization has to know why. And I made a mistake there. It's the treasurer. The treasury is the place where you store your wealth. The treasurer of an organization has to know why she is signing the check and what it is for. That is basic to the role of a treasurer. Well, that's exactly what I said just now. The treasurer also become culpable for allowing himself to be used to sign a check. He should have refused. Obviously, it will appear that he's suffering from some kind of self-inflicted weakness, lack of self-esteem. It will appear, due to the fact he's afraid if he doesn't sign the check, what could happen? He might lose the appointment, even though it's not a salaried position and he does not claim any kind of an allowances, as I heard him said in a commentary or a discussion between him, Roysdale Ford, and the other fellow, another Indo-Guyanese of the party that is famous and popular, so to say, in a conversation going on. One is the leader. Okay, let me go back a little bit. It is the treasury organization has to know why he or she is signing the check and what it is there for, or you are not worth your salt as a treasurer. That is basic to the role of a treasurer. Right, Freddie. It is problematic. It is a problematic situation for the treasurer if the party leader presents him or her with a blank check. After all, that is the leader making the request. But such a position is fraught with danger for the leader, warns Freddie Kissoon. Let me go on. One is the leader is making a demand on the treasurer, a high-level executive of the party, without transparency attached. So the leader will do that to a high-level party member who is responsible for signing checks and has a title of treasurer. You're making that demand without transparency attached, without any invoices, any reason, any voucher. What is the purpose of the blank check? Technically, that is what he's trying to say. It means that the leader is vulnerable to attacks from the treasurer. If the treasurer is in a faction that opposes the continuation of the leader, this is exactly what it seems is happening, that the leader now becomes vulnerable. Vulnerable means he could be easily held with a finger to his throat and put into trouble and exposed. He becomes vulnerable. He could be easily caught. If there's another faction that opposes the continuation of the leader. The other fact is that if word gets out that a party that wants to form the government and that criticizes the incumbent is not engaged in financial openness, then credibility runs into trouble. You have no credibility. You have no credit. Nobody can look up to you. This is what is happening right now to the PNC. So that is why we know that the PNC is out of money. They are not getting any contributions from local business people or from their supporters overseas based. And even the Florida based, which is one of the most powerful foreign PNC organizations, refuse to give them anything, and also has asked for his resignation and also his termination. I go on. The second revelation by Mr. Mursaleen is that he is faced with racial hostility in the PNC. He called a particular person name. Both statements have damaged the PNC, and to add gasoline to the fire, there is a troublesome woman in the PNC that I heard in the conversation with Roysdale Ford, and the other guy that is making headway in the internet, who that person is. We had, the name was called, and we know that person is a major troublemaker, even if he worked in the government when the PNC was in power, and even before, and so on. So we understand this troublemaker. Mr. Mursaleen has renounced his resignation as treasurer, and the PNC has accepted his return. So now, after all going on, he must tell him, man, come back, and so on. He decided to return, and he renounced or he withdrew the resignation. But I always say, if you're a man, stand with what you have done. Both the PNC and Mr. Mursaleen have to know that few people will accept such a comical situation, which will not strengthen the image of Messrs. Mursaleen and Norton. That doing that is not going to solve any problem. Your image will not look good. You'll be looked with more suspicion now, as if Norton is begging him to come back to save his skin, and to also try to keep the image that is a multi-ethnic party, and it is believed and suspected by many now under this party leader. It is suspected by many, according to words are being said, that the party is now a one-party party, one race party, one ethnic party. Mr. Mursaleen's reversal of his attitude was not about a disagreement about a policy or about a random incident, what Mr. Mursaleen said was extremely damaging, and no return to his post would help him with his future credibility. Nobody would trust him much anymore. So returning, and then which political party will want him? And that same party will not trust him with internal information because he could expose them again. In fact, it is best the PNC let Mr. Mursaleen go, and Mr. Mursaleen should leave politics. There are no alternatives, according to the political analyst and specialist, Freddie Kissoon. First, Mursaleen has earned the wrath of the Norton cabal. So, Norton has his group. So, but they all will now hate him, and they will scorn Mursaleen because he went public with this. The group will barely tolerate him. Secondly, and more importantly, Mursaleen will never ever be trusted by the PNC hierarchy again. And that is understandable. In fact, one can conclude that Mr. Mursaleen will become a figure of hate in the PNC's war room. And the PNC right now has a big war room because major powers are vying to be leader of the opposition and to control the powerful party that the People's National Congress is. The distrust will run deeply because Mr. Mursaleen in 2020 welcomed the PPP, returned to power, and did express confidence in the PPP. So that makes it even more complicated, because he welcomed the PPP, and the APNU was not managed by the PNC, was not welcoming the PPP. They wanted everyone to disagree, to be disenchanted, but he welcomed them. Number two, what he did to the PNC with his two revelations, no matter how much PNC leaders laugh with Mursaleen, the die is cast. He will never be emotionally welcomed back in the party. They might chat with him, they might tolerate him, they might watch him, they might talk about him, they will conspire against him, and they will use his ethnicity. From what I gather, this is what Freddie is saying. Secondly, Guyanese will either laugh at Mursaleen or hate him. Based on his behavior, one cannot see how Mursaleen will be an asset to the politics and what ethnic or electoral advantage he will bring. People will not even entertain a discussion with Mr. Mursaleen, much less seek to embrace what political message he has to offer. And listening to the conversation with the other two gentlemen, Royce Before and the other, he seems to have some serious problem in verbal explanation and so on. Seems to have a very serious issue. He needs to be guided and helped with that. Always on the front burner of their minds is the pappy show of him berating Norton for his aloof style of leadership, because he was attacking Norton. So the party people, especially the cabal of Norton, are going to be annoyed with him for exposing the poor, aloof style with which Norton manages. He, Mursaleen, acquiescence to signing blank checks on his accusations of anti-Indian feelings in the PNC, then running back to the PNC. It seems ludicrous, because he ran back. He didn't stand his ground and see what would have happened. Even if Mr. Mursaleen leaves the PNC because he's damaged goods, I doubt any other party will have him. He's now damaged goods, and if he walk away, the PNC know he's no threat, he's nothing, nobody will want him. And two, he has a very serious problem with his vocabulary and his speech craft. Speaking in a kind of a local language style and trying to speak English and messing up the words is another matter altogether. He did not have a dialogue with the PNC Central Committee, so they persuaded him to change his mind. He did not have a dialogue with a group of former party elders who watch over the PNC. He had no dialogue. He didn't have no discussion with them. He changed his mind on Monday when the day before he spoke to me on the phone, so they had a chat. He had a chat with Freddie Kissoon. What caused him to reverse himself? A meeting with PNCR leader? So what Mr. Norton should have said to Mursaleen to cause him to return to the treasurer post? So Freddie is asking, what did Norton tell him to get him to go back? Something is not right here. So Freddie obviously have a very suspicious mind. What caused him to go back? The contents of that information have no relevance anymore. Knowing that it doesn't matter anymore, both Norton and Mursaleen have lost credibility in the eyes of the PNC supporters and the nation. I think it would be best for Mursaleen to exit politics. As for Norton, I predicted that the knives would have been out of him. And let me read that back, please. As for Norton, I predicted the knives would have been out for him. So Freddie is saying he had predicted this, and that's true. And then he said, et tu, Brute. So you mean you too? You too, Brutus? You too, FAAIZ? But he was no friend of FAAIZ. So brothers and sisters, a beautiful article. I'm glad I brought it out. And listen to it very carefully. And send it to whom you think would be good. Your friend, your brother, me, Haji, Dr. Ocean, in the raw. Say thank you. A favor, friend.